Alright, so we're going over the healing changes in the past couple of weeks, and we're going to start with the easiest one first. So, Resto Shamans get what is in effect a 20% buff to all of their damaging abilities. This means Acid Rain, Chain Lightning, Lava Burst, Flame Shock, everything. They're just going to do 20% more damage now. From a gameplay perspective, I think Resto Shamans are in quite a good spot at the moment, actually. The weakest part of the spec has been that its throughput is a little lower than other healers. Not a great deal, but a little lower, and its damage, in a similar vein, lower than other healers. A straight 20% buff to all their damage will go quite a long way to resolving that issue. And as far as throughput goes, I don't think in raid testing, Restoration Shaman throughput was about roughly where people would expect. It wasn't the highest, it wasn't too far behind everybody else, middle of the pack if anything, from most of the logs and VODs and everything I saw. And this is a healing spec with a lot of utility, including damage reductions, Spirit Link Totem as an example, just very, very powerful buttons, which has historically always meant that Resto Shamans have never been the kings of healing throughput anyway. So even though they are slightly lower than everybody else at the moment, I don't necessarily think that that's them being where they shouldn't be. And for Mythic Plus, which is what most of my content is focused on, a straight damage buff is just, it's a big deal for healers. I didn't have problems healing anything in any of the 10s to 14s I was doing on beta. So on the whole, I think Resto Shamans are in a decent spot at the moment, mostly because of the utility they can bring. And in my mind, Resto Shaman being tuned well means that they aren't necessarily the kings of throughput, they aren't the healers that do the most damage, but they do have a lot of utility that can be very useful in a lot of situations. And I think they, if they're not there, they're very close to that kind of position at the moment. So this is a great change. Next up, we have the Discipline Priest changes, and these are quite big. So what is effectively happening is that Discipline Priests are going to get a passive. It's going to be Sins of the Many, which is going to stop being a talent and become a passive that increases damage Discipline Priests deal by everything by 30%, so long as they have atonements on 5 targets or less. And their healing transfer through atonement is being nerfed from 50% to 40%, so a 20% reduction. This is going to hit them fairly hard in raid as far as throughput goes, but this is not the throughput, it's not like Blizzard have looked at Discipline Priests who are middle of the pack or anything at the moment in beta, in raid throughput scenarios, and intentionally made them weak or on the lower end of throughput. This is Discipline Priests doing 20, 30, 40% more healing throughput than all other healers in raid testing, and Blizzard kind of toning that down while also increasing the damage Discipline Priests deal in Mythic Plus. This is a fantastic change. This is something that a lot of us have been asking for literally years. We were making posts about this back in Legion when Sins of the Many was first introduced, that it was a great talent that was a step in the right direction, and all it really needed was a significant buff to its numerical values. And we're finally getting there. This also means that the Sins of the Many talent on the tree is being changed into the Blaze of Light PvP talent, which is just smite and penance damage increased by 15% at rank 2. It also means, I mean, a lot of the other changes here, like the evangelism going back to 1.5 minutes and the power word radiance applying atonement for 60% of its normal duration, this is kind of superfluous. These were changes that were made in the previous round of tuning that are now being undone in this one. The nerf here is to Schism, going from 25% to 15%, but if you want to talent into it, Malicious Intent will increase Schism's duration by 6 seconds. Not a huge deal or change in this environment. The only real pain point that isn't being undone with these changes is the nerf to mind games, for discipline specifically, of 50%. I would also say that this harsh discipline change is going to be a nerf in some situations and a buff in others. Probably overall comes out to be a bit of a wash, especially as discipline priests get more gear, specifically more haste. It used to be that every 100 ticks of atonement gave you harsh discipline. Now at rank 2, and now it'll be every 5 casts of Smite. The big win here is this now means that you can use Penance defensively with Contrition if you really want to, and still be proccing Harsh Discipline, which is great because previously the 100 ticks of Atonement was something that you could fairly easily get between every penance, and that was because 7 bolts of penance on a few targets from a Harsh Discipline buffed cast of penance built up Harsh Discipline stacks for your next penance. Now that that's going away, like I said, it's a buff for defensive penance, but a bit of a nerf in environments where you weren't casting Smite often. In my previous disc video, I specifically mentioned that I found myself doing keys and not pressing Smite for quite, considerable amounts of time. And that is because with Power Word Shield being as strong as it is right now, you are always pressing that every 4 seconds or so. And then you're applying your Purge the Wickeds, using Divine Star, pressing Power Word Radiance, using Mind Games, casting Schism, pressing Shadow Word Death. It always just seems like there were, in many situations, better buttons to press than Smite. And that is going to change just because now you need 5 casts of Smite between all of your penances to buff all of your penances with Harsh Discipline. As far as these changes go on the whole, I will take that small Harsh Discipline nerf for a flat out 30% buff to all damage in Mythic Plus. That is a great trade in my opinion. And overall, I think they're great changes for Disc. Not only the changes themselves, but this, at least to me, signifies quite a large shift in Blizzard's approach to balancing Disciplined Priests. Historically, Atonement has always been necessarily weak in smaller scale content because it's balanced around being applied to 10, 15, 20 targets in raid. And now it looks like Blizzard are really kind of disconnecting that and allowing Discipline to be balanced differently in smaller scale content rather than larger scale content. So this is great overall. For Mythic Plus specifically, Atonement going from 50% to 40% and damage effectively going from 100% to 130% means that you can think of these changes as a very small buff to Atonement throughput. To put it in kind of pre-patch live terms, Atonement transfer is going from 50% of damage done to 52% of damage done. But Disc will just do more damage. And lastly, on to Mistweaver Monk. So the changes today were a 25% buff to Rising Sun Kick, a 20% nerf to Blackout Kick, a roughly 40% buff to Tiger Palm, and a blanket 5% nerf to pretty much every normal Mistweaver ability. So Enveloping Mist, Essence Font, Refreshing Jade Wind, Renewing Mist, all of that kind of stuff. Now the 5% nerf across the board really doesn't mean much of anything. Mistweaver throughput is still very high. To kind of put these changes in context, at the moment in pre-patch or prior to today's build in beta, Mistweavers had very efficient, mana efficient and powerful healing when Fistweaving with Ancient Teachings if they could hit multiple targets. And this is quite simply because of the Phalanx Stomp node and Awakened Phalanx. So if you could cleave multiple targets, and whenever you hit Tiger's Palm, you would hit 2 targets with it, and then that would cause your Blackout Kick to hit 9 times, spread out over 3 enemies. The change today actually reads a bit like a syntax or just a wording change. Basically, Awakened Phalanx, while within Phalanx Stomp, your Tiger Palm strike used to read 2 targets, now reads twice. Now, some people are going to see that and just think it's, Blizzard just trying to make the tooltip look nicer. But this is a functional change. So it used to be that if you wanted to cleave your Tiger Palms while standing on Awakened Phalanx, you needed 2 targets to do it. But now, you only need 1. So now, you can stand on your Phalanx and hit Tiger Palm, and you actually hit a single target twice, which then means when you Blackout Kick, you'll hit 3 times instead of twice. So the orange cells are live or prior to today's beta build, and the green is today's update. So if you were hitting a single target with just Tiger Palm Blackout Kick, you now do the same thing, and you can now cleave Tiger Palm on a single target, or hit a single target twice, you are effectively doing 44% more damage and healing while hitting a single target. And that is not including the buff to Rising Sun Kick and the effectively 50% increased chance to reset your Rising Sun Kick. And the Blackout Kick 20% nerf has effectively meant that if you were cleaving a pack of enemies, your damage and healing via Ancient Teachings has been decreased by 16%. Overall, this is a fantastic change, in my opinion. Blizzard did something very similar to this a couple of weeks ago. The intent being to scale down the power of Fistweaving in AoE scenarios and make it stronger in single target scenarios. And they're basically just taking that one step further today. The main benefit to all of these changes is really just comes down to mana. So I have been talking about Mistweaver in all of my previous videos and thinking about it while playing the beta as effectively one build that does two things at the moment. And that is, if you can hit multiple targets, you Fistweave with your Feline Stomp nodes and you do a lot of healing and a lot of damage without having to spend any mana really to do it. It's very efficient healing. It's powerful. And then the problem was that once you would go into a single target scenario, you lost all of that power and you were doing very negligible healing. And that is because, I mean, back when I was napkin mathing it out a few weeks ago before the Ancient Teachings buff and before the Feline buff and that kind of thing, hitting multiple targets was about 3.5 times stronger than hitting a single target. After today's change, that's probably more like in the ballpark of twice as strong. And this is a great change because it means that Mistweaver doesn't have to try and juggle the two different styles I talked about just before. One of them is the hitting multiple targets and Fistweaving while spending very little mana. And then in situations where that kind of wasn't enough healing, like when hitting a single target, you were forced to revert back to casted healing, spending a lot of mana, or cycling cooldowns. And today's change just means now that like Mistweaver can do much more substantial maintenance healing, so they can just kind of keep a party alive, not through particularly lethal damage patterns, but for just normal maintenance healing, spot healing, keeping the tank alive and things like that while hitting a boss. They can now do it without spending any real mana. They can just Fistweave and do damage and get quite substantial healing out from that alone. I think of these changes as not so much making Mistweavers more powerful in any kind of objective sense. It just makes their weaknesses less pronounced. Any increased, I guess you would say, free healing or very cheap healing through Fistweaving, the increased viability of that on single targets means that there is less reliance on casting and spending mana to heal with normal heals on single targets. And it really doesn't do much to nerf their AoE healing. Like if you're healing a Mythic Plus and you're hitting a whole pack of enemies, I don't think there will ever really be that many encounters where you would have to revert to pressing any other buttons. Feline Stomp, Ancient Teachings kind of cleave healing is just that powerful. The Thundercasters in Ruby Life Pools and a few packs maybe in Azure Vaults will require cooldowns, but I mean they'll be requiring cooldowns from every healer. Those are straight healing checks at the moment. Probably will get nerfed actually. So all in all, out of 3 sets of changes for 3 different specs in the last 2 weeks or so, I think they're all good. They're all good changes. If anything, they just bring all of the healers closer and closer together, where it's getting really, really difficult to kind of separate out which healers are better at which things and which ones might be better and for which reasons. I think there's actually much more variance in the power or the like tier list rankings of healers in PvP at the moment than I think there is in PvE, which is really kind of saying something. That could also be because I'm terrible at PvP, we don't know. But that'll be it for now. Thanks for watching, and algorithm stuff.